Jacques Maritain and the Christian Humanist Response to Political Humanism, delivered by Jim Kelly at the International Congress on Christian Humanism in the Third Millennium, The Perspective of Thomas Aquinas, held in Rome, September 21 through 25, 2003. In the Third Millennium, Christian humanism will be engaged in a battle with political humanism, a secularized Christianity crafted by politicians and the leaders of international non-governmental organizations to address the injustices created by globalization. To remain a distinctive and effective alternative to a relativist political humanism, Christian humanism must rediscover its heroic aspects as articulated in the political philosophy of Jacques Maritain. Jacques Maritain's heroic democracy. Maritain's vision of what I refer to as a heroic democracy is rooted in 13 foundational principles extracted from his many writings on the relationship between Christianity and democracy. First, respect each citizen as a person. A person is a universe of a spiritual nature, endowed with freedom of choice. It is only through the exercise of this freedom of choice, with intelligence and love, in accordance with the dictates of natural law, that a person can find complete fulfillment in God. Christianity confirms and emphasizes human equality by affirming that all persons share a blood relationship, are heirs of the same sin and weaknesses, are heirs of the same original greatness, are created in the image of God, and are called to a relationship with God. The primary concern of political society is to develop the conditions of human life which will enable each person to be positively aided in the pursuit of his spiritual freedom and completion. Society should be based on an integral humanist philosophy that respects the natural and supernatural existence of man. Only by rediscovering God will a person freely choose a heroic ideal of fraternal love and be able to live in fellowship with others. Second, reject a natural anthropocentric humanism. Anthropocentric humanism places man at the center of the world without any religious foundation upon which he can rely to do battle against the dehumanizing effects of modern society. Social scientific planning, which deals with the means of human life, fails to take into account the ends of human life. Without religion, a scientific approach to social order is unable to meet the demands of the democratic faith, such as freedom, love, and justice. The scientific approach to human progress oppresses the spirit and conscience of citizens in order to secure conformity. This makes it necessary for totalitarian regimes to compel the unity that normally would flow from the free choices of citizens. Third, promote the common good. The common good aids in the development of citizens and is the foundation for authority in society. It requires the development of virtues in the mass of citizens. The common good is personalist because society is a whole composed of persons whose dignity is prior to society, is communal because the person tends naturally towards society and community with others, requires a plurality of autonomous communities, and depends on the recognition of God to achieve its fulfillment. Citizens can agree on the practical principles of the common good, but cannot be required to abandon the various philosophical or religious creeds upon which they base their agreement. The practical principles forming the common good include a multitude of personal, political, and social rights and duties of persons who are part of a family society. Fourth, live a supernatural, integral humanism. A purely natural or philosophical moral philosophy only provides a theoretical system of ends, of rules for human conduct. Such a system ignores the true ends of human life. The theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity are directed toward God and are a gift of grace. The practice of the theological virtues gives rise to democracy of the person, pursuant to which freedom and love facilitate the creation of a self in the image of God. America's and Europe's political realism needs to become mindful of the eternal destiny of man and of the gospel's truths. Integral humanism considers man in the wholeness of his natural and supernatural being and sets no prior limit to the descent of the divine into man. Christians no longer have to separate their private religious life from their public activities. By participating in a democratic society, citizens can integrate the natural and supernatural and complete themselves in service to the common good. To flourish, Western democracies must promote their vital principle, which is justice and love, and the source of which is of divine origin. Fifth, cultivate prophets of the people. Democratic heroism requires that citizens be prepared to lose their lives for the common good, which, invigorated by the sacrifice of its citizens, will enhance freedom and justice for future generations. Prophets are needed to awaken the people as to their civic duties. In periods of crisis, prophets are often found among those spiritual individuals who, finding things as they are intolerable, simply refuse to accept things as they are. Humanity has been well served by the multitude of unapparent saints, all those who practice to the very end self-abnegation, devotion to others, and firmness in the virtues. However, in order to compensate for the decline in the number of unapparent saints among us, there must be an increase in the number of great, exemplary saints. 6. Educate children for freedom. A philosophy of education for freedom is one which respects the need to develop the spiritual personality of the person so that the life of spirit and freedom will dominate that of passion and of the senses. Education should not focus on over-specialized technical training to the detriment of developing those spiritual energies which advance the democratic ideal. The proper goal of state education is to enlighten and strengthen reason by concentrating on knowledge and intellect. The state should not attempt to shape the will and directly develop moral virtues in the youth, a natural responsibility of the family and religion. American education is at a crossroads between an instrumentalist and pragmatist philosophy of education and an integral humanist philosophy of education for freedom. 7. Facilitate faith-based and community initiatives. Unless he is integrated in a body of social communications, a person cannot attain the fullness of his life and accomplishment. Small groups, which are able to embrace love of wisdom and of the intellect, have always been the ones who performed the great work. The presence in America of a multitude of voluntary associations has enhanced the notion of community and increased the charitable spirit of the nation. Christian-inspired political initiatives are more likely to take a long-range view towards social action and transform society through respect and love for the person. Participants in faith-based initiatives should emphasize private vows, the preeminent of which is the vow of prayer, and the others of which include a vow of compassion or fraternal friendship, and a vow of dedication to truth. The future of civilization depends on the work of the Christian laity as influenced by the gospel, regular spiritual renewal, prayer, and suffering united with Christ. Religion can make an authoritative intervention in politics for the protection of the spiritual good, but should never surrender its independence by leaking itself to a particular political party. 8. Practice the principle of subsidiarity. The state is an instrument in the service of man. Putting man at the service of that instrument is a political perversion. Civil society is made up of individuals and the particular societies formed by them. A pluralist body politic allows these societies the greatest autonomy possible and diversifies its own internal structure in a way that respects their nature and functions. 9. Protect freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression. Each citizen belongs to two states, a terrestrial state whose end is the common temporal good, and the universal state of the Church whose end is eternal life. Freedom of thought and conscience are fundamental to the American democratic experiment, which thrives on freedom of expression, access to knowledge, and the unceasing work of invention, criticism, and demands of individual conscience. The state has no right to impose on the citizens a philosophical or religious creed which would present itself as the only possible justification of the democratic ideals to which citizens pledge their loyalty. The goal aimed at by the state educational system, unity in the common adherence to the democratic charter, can only be achieved by adopting the pluralist principle, whereby the state equally respects each citizen's religious or philosophical justifications for such adherence. The state should positively facilitate, on a neutral basis, the religious, social, and educational work through which spiritual or other cultural groups freely cooperate in the common welfare. 10. Engage in divine contemplation. Democracy is sustained by truth, values and realities which are above time and are worth being known for their own sake, and freedom, which is the very condition for the exercise of thought about truth. All without exception are called to perfection, which is the same as that of God, and to the contemplation, in either a mystical or active way, of the saints. America must break free of the cult of action, for the works which penetrate furthest into the future are those which the Spirit of God ordains in silence and leads as His freedom wills. The first thing needed by the world is the contemplation of the saints and their love, because it causes the gifts of divine life and of substantial love to abound on the earth. 11. Expect and embrace persecution. Blessed is the person who suffers persecution for the sake of the justice of God's kingdom and for the sake of justice on earth. The more unhappiness he bears in his temporal existence, the more he may hope to have life everlasting in the kingdom of heaven. The most fundamental order of human life is to exist with a person, to love a person in the sense of becoming one with him, bearing his burdens, living a common moral life with him, feeling with him, and suffering with him. Through civil disobedience, a person engages in a spiritual trial, the effect of which is to convince others through the power of love. The tears and sufferings of the persecuted manifest a perpetual effort, consistent with the gospel teachings, to improve human destiny and life. the supreme value in the opinion of the Europeans is intelligence, whereas the supreme value in America is goodness, human reliability, goodwill, devotion, helpfulness. The pursuit of truth, which is the first duty of an artist or poet, requires the courage to endure suffering for a reality that others have not yet seen. 12. Seek international cooperation. The ideological agreement which is necessary among those who seek international peace can be restricted to a certain body of practical points and of principles of action. However, no one is entitled to demand that others subscribe to his own justification of the agreed-to practical principles. There is real and general tolerance only when a person who is absolutely convinced of a truth at the same time recognizes the right of those who deny this truth to exist and to contradict him. The first step toward a world political society would be the creation of a world council who would impart ethical and political wisdom independent of any national government, an organized international opinion. The human race will never succeed in eliminating all evil in the world. In the interim, the love of charity must reign supreme. 13. Recognize democratic evolution. Every great age of culture receives its deepest meaning and direction from a particular constellation of spiritual forces or dominating ideas. The task of the emergent civilization will consist in rediscovering the sense of human dignity, in rehabilitating man in God and through God, not apart from God. Human progress consists of a vertical movement toward eternal life begun in the present, which strengthens the creative forces of the Spirit and of liberty that, simultaneously, are revealed in the horizontal movement of man in history. The supreme ideal of a genuine democracy, the inauguration of a brotherly city, requires the climate of a heroic conception of life, voluntarily fixed on the absolute and upon spiritual values. Human rights, or the denial thereof, facilitate the experiential development of awareness, which is the most important factor in the moral progress of humanity. Christians must intervene in the destiny of the world, winning, through science and through social and political action, a power over nature and history, while remaining a subordinate agent to divine providence. Christian political action would proceed by advancing in stages, proposing and executing its plans of approach and its own programs, specified by the eternal end to which they are ordered. Human history advances in time by undergoing two internal movements, one movement drawing upward toward the divine life of the kingdom of grace, the other movement drawing downward everything in mankind which belongs to the prince of this world. The challenge of political humanism. Maritain's term, anthropocentric humanism, includes several categories of natural humanist viewpoints, all of which share the feature of being, quote, emancipated from every metaphysics of transcendence, end quote. At one extreme rests the idea of secular humanism, the idea that all religious thought should be banned from expression in the public square. At the other extreme rests the idea of ethical humanism, the idea that a full-bodied natural ethics should govern all relations in the public square. As society enters into the third millennium, many politicians and social planners recognize that an empty secular humanism is incapable of maintaining the global social fabric. However, they likewise recognize that the global state is incapable of developing and implementing a normative ethical humanism that can be understood and practiced by all humanity. Thus, these global agents are left with two alternatives. rely on the formative and remedial capacities of traditional religions, or construct and promote what I refer to as political humanism. It is against this new political humanism that Christian humanism must compete in the third millennium. There are 7 key features of political humanism. 1. Political humanism is born out of fear and desperation that the state has offered no alternative to Pope John Paul II's call for achieving global solidarity through subsidiarity. 2. Political humanism is relativist. 3. It is utilitarian. 4. Political humanism is selective in that it protects and promotes only those human rights that further the social and commercial agenda of the international community. 5. Political humanism is, therefore, intolerant of peaceful and particular religious beliefs that cannot be reconciled with that agenda. 6. Political humanism is developed and promoted by international bodies and their affiliated non-governmental education and human rights organizations. 7. Finally, political humanism is coercive in that it relies on monopolistic school funding practices that handicap parents who seek to educate their children in peace-loving and peace-promoting religious schools. This last feature makes it clear that the promoters of political humanism understand that children must be indoctrinated in this new religion of humanity. This indoctrination is being conducted under several names, including human rights education, education for a culture of peace, education for democratic citizenship, and character education. UNESCO, the Council of Europe, the United States Department of Education, Amnesty International, George Soros's Open Society Foundation, and university human rights centers around the world develop the political humanism education curriculum, train educators, and coordinate the implementation of political humanism in state-sponsored schools. For example, UNESCO presently has posted on its website a job opening for chief of its section on education for peace and human rights. One of the listed main responsibilities of this position is to, quote, ensure the intellectual coherence of a focused program on education for peace and human justice, which reflects and builds a growing global consensus, end quote. But as members of the political section at this conference, we must ask the question, is the nature of this so-called growing global consensus on peace and human justice consistent with Maritain's Christian humanist vision of heroic democracy? It is absolutely not. The global consensus of political humanism dehumanizes the person by insisting on social conformity, stifles education for freedom, discourages subsidiarity and the formation of faith-based and community initiatives, denies freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression, and makes a farce of international efforts to promote a genuine common good. These shortcomings of political humanism will be exacerbated if, as expected, world leaders justify the expansion of the political humanist education of youth as a means of addressing the root causes of international terrorism. Political humanism defies Maritain's belief that a sound pluralism must obtain in the means of achieving unity in the common adherence to the democratic charter. He insisted that, in promoting the common good, the state must respect, quote, the philosophical or religious traditions and schools of thought which are spontaneously at work in the consciousness of the nation and which have contributed historically to its formation, end quote. Many European political and social leaders have embraced political humanism to the exclusion of Christian humanism. On this point, in his recent apostolic exhortation, Ecclesia in Europa, the Holy Father asked that the future European Constitution refer to Europe's religious patrimony, particularly Christian, and respect the rights proper to churches and religious communities. Pope John Paul II reminds Europe that, quote, the gospel is not against you, but for you, end quote. Likewise, Jacques Maritain believed that the gospel inspiration is the true living soul of democratic philosophy. He expressed confidence that, in the free competition among competing viewpoints as justification for the common good, quote, the Christian leaven would play an ever-growing part, end quote. Indeed, this is a competition, the ground rules for which are to be determined by the highest judicial authorities in each nation. In the United States of America, the U.S. Supreme Court has taken historic steps to level the playing field for the competition between political humanism and Christian humanism. In 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that public school authorities must provide equal after-school access to classroom space to groups for the character education of youth. In its decision, the court stated that it saw, quote, no logical difference in kind, end quote, between the character education of children in secularized values and the character education of children in purely religious values. It rejected the local school board's imposition of a penalty on the expression of the Christian humanist viewpoint. Politically active Christian humanists worldwide must respond to the advance of political humanism. We must, 1. Understand the nature and threat of political humanism. 2. Examine whether state authorities in our respective nations are imposing a political humanist agenda, particularly in the schools. 3. Educate sympathetic lawyers, lawmakers, and judges regarding the reality of political humanism. And 4. Combat discrimination against the Christian humanist viewpoint by those seeking a coercive monopoly for the political humanist viewpoint. In closing, let me emphasize that state authorities are relying on two seemingly positive values as justification for promoting political humanism: tolerance and peace. In this regard, we must consider the prophetic insight of Jacques Maritain. Quote, it is not unusual to meet people who think that not to believe in any truth, or not to adhere firmly to any assertion as unshakably true in itself, is a primary condition required of citizens in order to be tolerant of one another and to live in peace with one another. May I say that these people are in fact the most intolerant people. For if perchance they were to believe in something as unshakably true, they would feel compelled, by the same stroke, to impose by force and coercion their own belief on their co-citizens. The only remedy they have found to get rid of their abiding tendency to fanaticism is to cut themselves off from truth. Political humanists attempt to avoid Maritain's prediction by replacing truth with a relativist, utilitarian global ethic that they profess does not rise to the level of a belief imposed on humanity. To Christian humanists commissioned to dispel this notion and offer the gospel message to humanity, our Holy Father challenges us and encourages us with the words, "Be not afraid.